This episode is brought to you by Huggies Little Snuggler. Huggies is the only leading brand with all-around blowout protection for sizes 1 and 2. All my parents out there know that there is nothing worse than a blowout. Within days of switching to Huggies Little Snugglers, I noticed my anxiety around diaper changes decrease exponentially. Just last weekend, I was mid-sip on my coffee when next to me my sister gasped. Boom, diaper blowout everywhere. Luckily, I had a stack of Huggies Little Snugglers on me, soft and pillowy, a tiny cloud of salvation. A few minutes later, my nephew was fresh, and hours later, no more blowouts. Crisis averted. You shouldn't have to live your life worrying about how you'll deal with the next inevitable blowout. Ease your blowout anxiety by switching to Huggies Little Snugglers. Huggies Little Snugglers are up to 100% leak-proof with blowout protection in the front and back on sizes 1 and 2, so you can feel confident relying on them for your little ones. Huggies Little Snugglers, now with blowout protection in every direction, sizes 1 and 2. Huggies, we got you, baby.
Sonoro presents the Chisme Corner with V. Rivera, the podcast where cultura, motherhood, and pop culture collide. I'm V. Rivera, your host and your honorary homegirl, bringing you raw combos, healing moments, and a little bit of spicy chisme every week. Catch the Chisme Corner with V. Rivera, an original podcast series from Sonoro, wherever you listen to podcasts.
He told me that no child lived there. But every Friday from the same window, I always saw a child who waved at me.
Good evening, community. I hope that in turbulent times like the ones we live in, you're having a peaceful night. One that lends itself to stopping everything for a moment and paying attention to a story. A tale of ghosts and perhaps other beings as well. Does anyone here know what a Djinn is? Has anyone wondered what the entities or demons that frighten people in other parts of the world are like? And if they can transcend to another place on the planet? What does a low astral entity need to manifest itself, if not simply a person who believes in it? Tonight's episode is an interesting one, community. One of those where we're going to need your opinions, your comments, your hypotheses. You know I'm not an expert. I'm just someone who tells stories. What's wonderful about this community is that those who know the most are almost always there, on your side. It's time. You can turn off the light if you can do so, because we're about to enter stories that challenge our entire reality. You're listening to Tales of the Night. My name is Giovanni Rodriguez, and it makes me somewhat nervous to share this experience. I still find it hard to understand if what I saw was real, or somehow just my imagination. A few months ago, I was heading home on the Mexico City Metro. It was late. It wasn't rush hour, but there were enough people so as not to feel alone. I was sitting by the doors that don't open. We were heading to Camarones Station on the Orange Line. I don't remember well which station it was, but an elderly man got on. Very elderly. He carried a wooden cane. He wore worn gray sweatpants and sweatshirt. Everything about him seemed faded, colorless, as if he had been taken from an asylum. He entered very slowly and sat in the seats for elderly people. Everything seemed normal until a couple of stations later. Then he got up and got off the train. But the strange thing was that no one else got off there. And outside you couldn't see anyone at the station. No vendors, no police. Not even a person walking on the platform. For that hour, that wasn't common at all. He got off and turned around. I saw how he stood next to the yellow line, looking inward. The doors closed in front of him, and the train continued on its way. I thought that's where it all ended, that it was just a strange episode and nothing more. But several stations later, the train stopped and I got off alone. It seemed strange not to see anyone, but just when I started walking toward the exit, I heard something. It was a dry tapping, slow, as if someone were walking, hitting a cane against the floor. I turned around toward the back of the platform, and there he came, walking very slowly right toward me, as if he had just gotten off the same train. But that was impossible. I had seen him stay at another station, already very far from there. I saw it. I saw the train move forward. I hurried to exit. The sound of the cane faded with that of the advancing train. I didn't look back, but I didn't hear anything else. Not a sound behind me, as if he had never been there. Thank you very much for listening, community, for believing me or not. Greetings to everyone who, like me, takes the metro every day. I live in a tenement in an old neighborhood in the center, humble but well cared for by the people who have lived there for decades. I'm one of those few who has integrated relatively recently. I live in a small apartment, the one at the back of the tenement, perfect for a single guy like me. Besides, the station for my transport to work is just a few blocks away. I had never lived in a tenement, but I don't mind having to share spaces. What did worry me is that my wall adjoins the last apartment of the tenement behind, a very different one from ours. Despite being identical, it's deeply neglected, and people live there who don't dedicate themselves to precisely honest things. It's not to generalize, but everyone knows it. Besides, it's quite noticeable. The tenements, as I tell you, are twin buildings, but how they were maintained by their tenants made them look completely different. In mine there were homes, in the one behind, hideouts. It's hard to describe, but I think we all know a place that looks like that. I had to share a wall with people of ill will. Sometimes I had to listen to their drinking binges until the early hours of a weekday without being able to sleep, when the next morning I had work, but with no way to complain. The only good thing about it is that the inhabitants never lasted long. The apartment on the other side of the wall had apparently been uninhabited for several days. At least I didn't hear anything. I had relaxed, but one night, not even that late, around 11, I started to hear them moving things. Furniture, dishes, very heavy things. I went back to look for my earplugs to sleep, hoping the new neighbors wouldn't bring bad news. But the next 2 nights it was the same. After 11, there was a lot of movement that forced me to sleep with my earplugs in, my face under the pillow. Until Friday. That Friday when I didn't have to sleep early, and when coincidentally there was no noise, at 11 I put on a series ready to stay up late and watched it in complete tranquility until I fell asleep. I woke up and in the early morning there were noises again, someone moving things in the kitchen. But when I woke up properly, when I woke up completely, I realized that this time the noises were coming from inside my apartment. It was impossible for someone to get in. It has a reinforced metal interior door, impossible to open from outside. That's why I got up scared, but at the same time, incredulous. But when I opened my bedroom door, it was clear that someone was moving my things in the kitchen. It could be heard perfectly. I couldn't see the kitchen from the door, but as if by reflex I shouted, "Who's there?" from where I was. I don't know, so that whatever was there would leave or something like that. I did it without thinking. The sound suddenly stopped. I heard someone running toward the door. I turned on the lights. Several kitchen drawers were open. I even noticed gray dust on the floor. I went to the door. It was properly closed from the inside. No one had entered, and most importantly, no one could have left and secured it again from the inside. Physically, it couldn't be done. If it weren't for the open drawers, I could think it was all my imagination, that I was just dreaming it. Nothing more. But there was no one. Nothing. I turned off the lights. I went back to the door just to make sure. To touch it. To make sure everything was okay. Everything was in order. I took 2 steps toward my bedroom when I heard something. A kind of fleeting laugh behind me, like someone holding back from laughing. I turned around. Everything was dark. I kept my gaze toward the living room for a moment, trying to adapt to the darkness. As I did, I could give shape to something that was hidden in the darkest corner of the living room, looking at it from the feet and slowly going up. There was something there, something almost as tall as the ceiling, barefoot, dressed in black rags, with hands one palm over the other at chest level, like hugging itself, like covering itself. It was very dark, but I could see that there were no lips or skin covering its teeth, no eyelids covering its eyes either. Then it made a slight movement with its head, as if pointing me toward the bedroom, as if ordering me to return to my room, and without understanding why, I did it. I went back to my bedroom, secured my door, and got under the bed trembling. I put in my usual earplugs and stayed there trying to sleep, although I couldn't do it. When I noticed it had dawned, I went out. In the tenement, there was always someone awake, and I trusted those people a lot. I needed human contact to feel that reality was returning. I saw Don Enrique leaving for work and I went with him. He had a magazine stand 2 blocks from the tenement, and I don't know if it's because of that, but he's the most cultured person I know, as if he had read all his magazines. I felt confident telling him what had happened, or necessity. Maybe, but I did it. He just stood thinking. We walked for a good stretch in complete silence. He then told me that he believed me, that it wasn't a dream, and that it probably had to do with the new neighbors. "Do you know what a djinn is?" he asked me, and I said no. He scratched his head and tried to explain it to me like a genie, let's say, but not one of those that grant wishes. Yes, but not those, but not the ones from stories, the real ones, the spirits of Islam. I think he saw from my face that I wasn't quite understanding, because that's when he asked me if I knew who my new neighbors were, who shared my wall in the tenement behind. Refugees arrived. Good people. They come fleeing from the war in Afghanistan. I don't know how they even got here. A couple of families. But everything would make sense. Or not. Do you think if we had to go to the other side of the world, our saints would abandon us? Do you think our ghosts wouldn't follow us? He told me. I didn't know what to believe. And that afternoon, Don Enrique's wife arrived. He sent her to go pray and sprinkle holy water in my apartment. Thank God I never heard anything inside my house again, much less see anything similar. You see, Djinn, I want to think that prayer worked, that everything returned to its place.
This episode is brought to you by Huggies Little Snuggler. Huggies is the only leading brand with all-around blowout protection for sizes 1 and 2. All my parents out there know that there is nothing worse than a blowout. Within days of switching to Huggies Little Snugglers, I noticed my anxiety around diaper changes decrease exponentially. Just last weekend, I was mid-sip on my coffee when next to me my sister gasped. Boom, diaper blowout everywhere. Luckily, I had a stack of Huggies Little Snugglers on me, soft and pillowy, a tiny cloud of salvation. A few minutes later, my nephew was fresh, and hours later, no more blowouts. Crisis averted. You shouldn't have to live your life worrying about how you'll deal with the next inevitable blowout. Ease your blowout anxiety by switching to Huggies Little Snugglers. Huggies Little Snugglers are up to 100% leak-proof with blowout protection in the front and back on sizes 1 and 2, so you can feel confident relying on them for your little ones. Huggies Little Snugglers, now with blowout protection in every direction, sizes 1 and 2. Huggies, we got you, baby.
What did you think of this story, dear community? I'd really be interested in hearing your opinions, if you believe that ghosts, demons, can travel with us. Because it's an extremely interesting topic and we are anxious to read from the people who know the most. And of course, we know there are experts among the listeners of Tales of the Night. I remind you that the best way to support this project is by subscribing. If you haven't done it yet, become part of the community and rate it with 5 stars. If you like the podcast, with a thumbs up. If you're listening on YouTube, that really helps us a lot to continue bringing stories to you. Now we're going to the Sierra Norte of Puebla, with a story that we're going to use to send greetings to the teachers in the audience. Thank you for that noble work. We continue with more stories tonight. Hello. My name is Limber, and I want to share with you an experience I had about 8 years ago when I started working as a telesecondary teacher. I've always been interested in the paranormal. In my family, many scary stories were told, and I was fascinated listening to them, but I never imagined living one in the flesh. I always saw them as distant, as something that happens, but not to me. When I entered the teaching service, I was assigned to a community in the Sierra Norte of Puebla called Atenti Oriente. I lived 4 hours away by public transport, so I needed to stay in the area during the week. An aunt of my husband helped me get a room to rent in a larger and closer community, Ometepec, which in Nahuatl means between two hills. It was about 30 minutes from my school. The first sensation I had when arriving in Ometepec was sadness, heaviness. The place gave the impression of being old, neglected, with a melancholy present in all corners, especially during rainy season. There was no cell phone signal, and very few houses had internet. Some streets weren't even paved, and there were still people who traveled by donkey or horse. Whenever I remember that place, I visualize it in gray tones. I don't know why. I arrived on a Sunday afternoon with my boyfriend, who is now my husband, an aunt of his, and her son. It was the first time I was away from my family, so I felt sad, but also very excited. I had gotten my position and knew I had to make sacrifices to practice. The lady who rented me the room was kind and gave me confidence. She led us to the house located in the center of the community. From outside it looked big, bigger than the others, but inside it was more of a warehouse than a house. The first floor had no windows or light bulbs. It was full of old junk, refrigerators, construction bundles, and stacked containers. It was so dark that even though it was still daytime, the lady had to turn on a lamp to show us the way. We went up some stairs to the second floor. Everything was in half-finished walls and construction materials already ruined. Every sound repeated with an echo. Finally, we reached the third floor. There, only one room. It was enabled, mine. To one side was a bathroom without a door, barely covered by a curtain, and at the back, 2 empty rooms with doors always open. It was terrible. But it wasn't just the only thing I could afford. It was literally the only place in the community where I could stay. My boyfriend and his family helped me unpack. I didn't want them to leave me there. I was terrified of being alone, but it was impossible for them to stay, and well, the first weeks passed normally. A colleague who lived practically next door came by for me every morning to go to school. We returned together every day, shortly before 3 in the afternoon. Even so, entering the building was always distressing. As soon as I closed the door to the first floor, everything went silent, as if isolating me from everything, as if I was no longer in that town. Crossing the warehouse in the dark was the worst. Sometimes, if I forgot my cell phone or it was discharged, I would stumble over poorly arranged things. On the second floor, I walked with my gaze on the floor out of fear. Every night I locked up securely and slept with a knife under the pillow and a small image of the Virgin Mary. There I was afraid of both the living and the ghosts, but until then I thought it was just suggestion from being alone, the place so gloomy. Until one night I heard something dragging on the second floor. It was as if something very heavy was moving through the space. The echo made it feel as if it reached my room. I tried to think it was workers, but it was too late for that. The sound lasted several minutes. Then, total silence. To relax, I put on children's movies on the laptop. Almost half an hour passed when I heard barefoot steps going up the stairs. They were heavy. They came from the first step. I stayed seated on the bed listening. Just when it seemed they were going to reach the third floor, they stopped dead. I looked out the window. There was no one. From then on, things got worse. One night, the house started to vibrate as if everything was shaking, as if it was going to collapse. I thought it was an earthquake, I got scared because obviously the place wasn't finished. Maybe it lacked supports or foundations or was poorly built to shake like that. And the television moved. A couple of things on my dresser fell. As soon as it stopped moving, I went out to the third-floor terrace expecting to see people scared around, outside their houses. But everything was normal. Apparently, no one had felt anything. The next day, I asked my colleague if she had felt the earthquake, but she told me there had been no tremor. The days were getting longer for me in that place. I remember it was shortly after when one afternoon, while I was showering, I heard footsteps again. I turned off the faucet to listen well. They were footsteps that approached, that entered my room. I was paralyzed. The bathroom had no door, and I was naked. I stayed still for several minutes until I gathered courage. When I came out, there was no one, but I knew what I had heard. That corner was cured, and I could barely sleep. I didn't feel like I was alone. I couldn't feel safe despite being in what was supposed to be my home, my safe place. 2 days later, my parents came to visit me. Seeing them was a relief, but my father, seeing the place, was categorical. How can you live here alone? This place looks horrible. Get out of here. Go with someone from the community, but don't stay here. I told him yes, that I was fine, but I really wasn't planning to do it, although I would have wanted to. I had already consulted, and there was no other option in the community. The first night they slept with me, everything was quiet, but the second, while we were talking already lying down, the house shook again. This time I noticed it was a different tremor from earthquakes. The movement was more like a barely perceptible vibration, very short but strong movements. As if the movement didn't come from the ground but from the house itself. We saw how the water I had was agitated. We ran out, went down all the stairs outside. Once again, everything was calm. No one else had felt it, but at least I knew I wasn't crazy. My parents felt it too. They got as scared as I did, although they blamed it on surely being poor construction, and they pressured me even more to leave it. And yes, that same week I finally decided to leave at all costs. But not because of those tremors, but because of a dream, if I can call it that. The most terrifying I've had in my life. In the dream, I woke up in my room. Everything was the same, like when I went to sleep. I could see it perfectly, as if it weren't a dream. Everything was silent. I only heard my breathing. But soon I realized that what I heard wasn't mine. There was another breathing right behind me, in the corner where there was a hollow piece of furniture with folded clothes. The breathing gradually became stronger. I tried to pray, but praying inside a dream is difficult. Then the breathing was changing little by little, as if trying to laugh, and it said later. Then it murmured something I didn't understand. In the dream, I tried to run, get out of the room. I suppose I moved so hard, asleep, that I woke up very startled. When I moved my legs, it was already dawning. Instinctively, I turned toward the corner, toward my clothes, where I'd heard that breathing hiding in my dream. Sure enough, my clothes were scattered, as if something had been under them and had run out. That day at school, I decided I wouldn't spend one more night in that place. I decided I would only return to pack and then look for somewhere to go. But I couldn't spend one more night there. When I returned to the house that afternoon, I noticed that the clothes that were scattered had shape, as if someone had been sitting on them. It was very clear, even the shape of the legs. I was lucky to find where to stay. I went to live with a family in the community where I worked, in a very humble place, but one that gave me the tranquility I had been looking for so much. I never returned to Ometepec. When I told everything to my colleague, the one who lived almost next to my house, the one who came by for me every day, she became thoughtful and told me the following. I never wanted to tell you anything so as not to scare you, but on weekends when you left with your parents from my house, we would see that up there in your room the lights would turn on and off. The curtains would move as if someone was looking out. Sometimes we would see someone crossing by the window. At first, we thought it was you. But then we understood it wasn't. That you weren't there. And now less, because you left. And that continues to be seen.
This episode is brought to you by Huggies Little Snuggler. Huggies is the only leading brand with all-around blowout protection for sizes 1 and 2. All my parents out there know that there is nothing worse than a blowout. Within days of switching to Huggies Little Snugglers, I noticed my anxiety around diaper changes decrease exponentially. Just last weekend, I was mid-sip on my coffee when next to me my sister gasped. Boom, diaper blowout everywhere. Luckily, I had a stack of Huggies Little Snugglers on me, soft and pillowy, a tiny cloud of salvation. A few minutes later, my nephew was fresh, and hours later, no more blowouts. Crisis averted. You shouldn't have to live your life worrying about how you'll deal with the next inevitable blowout. Ease your blowout anxiety by switching to Huggies Little Snugglers. Huggies Little Snugglers are up to 100% leak-proof with blowout protection in the front and back on sizes 1 and 2, so you can feel confident relying on them for your little ones. Huggies Little Snugglers, now with blowout protection in every direction, sizes 1 and 2. Huggies, we got you, baby.
Community. I want to share with you something I experienced a few years ago when I was starting as a water delivery man in an area south of the city. It wasn't an easy job, especially during hot weather, but I appreciated it because it kept me physically active, something I need to do every day for health. And besides, I liked that they always assigned me the same route. There was a particular private street where I had to deliver every Friday. It was a closed street, with single-story houses, leafy trees, and very, very quiet neighbors. They always said nothing happened there, that it was the safest place in the area, that there I could even leave my keys stuck in my truck. And maybe that's why I never imagined that right there I would experience something that, to this day, I can't explain. The first time I saw him was there, in the white house with black bars on all the windows, the third one entering the private street. I was unloading the water jugs when I saw him at the window. A boy about 6 years old. He had a red sweater and was looking at me fixedly from inside. He didn't seem to be afraid, or even curious. He just looked at me, and then raised his little hand and waved at me. I smiled at him and raised my hand too. It seemed tender to me. I didn't give it much importance. And the following week, he was there again. He did the same thing again, and the one after that too. He was always there, at the same window, at the same time. Always watching. Sometimes he smiled and sometimes he didn't, but he always waved at me. It made me somewhat sad. In other places, there are always children who come up, who greet me as if they knew me. They are in general much more interested in my work than adults, with curiosity. You know, there are some who even ask me if I'm the one who brings water to the whole city, how I do it, where I bring it from, if it comes from the mountains and I go there to fill it up. But he was always there, alone, in that house with bars, the only one in the private street with protection like that. They never let him out. One day, a man finally came out of that house. He asked me for a water jug. I had never left any there. But sometimes, when the competitor's truck is late, they buy from me. So I took the opportunity to ask him, "Hello? How is the boy, sir?" The man looked at me strangely. Then he said, "What boy?" "The little one." "The one who always looks out?" I told him, pointing to the window a few meters from the door where we were. He was quiet for a few seconds and then told me, more seriously, "There are no children here, young man. I live alone with my wife." I laughed. I swear I thought he was playing a joke on me, but his expression didn't change. He repeated, "There's no child here." "Are you sure you're not confusing yourself?" The tone became almost annoyed on his part, almost forcing me to answer what I answered. "Yes, sir. I'm sure I didn't confuse myself." "Excuse me." The following Friday, I didn't see him at the window, nor the next one. But 2 weeks later, while I was walking with the water jugs toward the gate. There he was again, the same boy, the same red sweater. But this time he didn't wave at me. I looked down for a second to adjust the jug, and when I looked back up, he wasn't there anymore. I told my coworker, who also makes deliveries in the area and who previously had my route. He told me that address sounded familiar, that he thought he had heard a similar story about a house around there. It was the news about a house in the area where a family with several children lived and one of their children had been lost. A 6-year-old boy who disappeared out of nowhere without leaving a trace, despite the bars on his house. They looked for him for a long time, but eventually the family left. The pain and the memory made it impossible for them to continue there. They ended up renting the house. The truth is, I didn't follow the story. I didn't know if they found him or not. I'm going to search. But it must be very sad, right? Imagine returning to your house looking for your family, and they're no longer there. We have to pray for him, for whatever. That poor boy you see finds peace, he told me. I know there are many jobs where people tend to have experiences. I always thought it was those at night, on remote roads on the highway. I never thought I'd experience something paranormal delivering water during the day in the quietest part of the city. I prayed a lot, and also asked my mom, who is much more religious than me, to include that boy in her prayers. Since then, I didn't see him. The curtains were always closed in that house. I no longer looked down, but I felt something as if they were watching me from there. Have you felt it? A gaze on your back. The last time I went to leave water at that house was with the lady. She asked me to come in to leave the jug in the kitchen. I saw the window completely covered with an opaque black thermal fabric of those used to completely block light and heat. Maybe because of the heat of those days, or maybe they didn't want to be told that something appeared at the window again. I'm still on the route, but I no longer have to go to that private street. They say it's temporary. I'm very curious to return.
This episode is brought to you by Huggies Little Snuggler. Huggies is the only leading brand with all-around blowout protection for sizes 1 and 2. All my parents out there know that there is nothing worse than a blowout. Within days of switching to Huggies Little Snugglers, I noticed my anxiety around diaper changes decrease exponentially. Just last weekend, I was mid-sip on my coffee when next to me my sister gasped. Boom, diaper blowout everywhere. Luckily, I had a stack of Huggies Little Snugglers on me, soft and pillowy, a tiny cloud of salvation. A few minutes later, my nephew was fresh, and hours later, no more blowouts. Crisis averted. You shouldn't have to live your life worrying about how you'll deal with the next inevitable blowout. Ease your blowout anxiety by switching to Huggies Little Snugglers. Huggies Little Snugglers are up to 100% leak-proof with blowout protection in the front and back on sizes 1 and 2, so you can feel confident relying on them for your little ones. Huggies Little Snugglers, now with blowout protection in every direction, sizes 1 and 2. Huggies, we got you, baby.